Lapel pins let you proudly show off where you've been or where you stand. From an event you've attended or your political beliefs to your professional affiliation or your favorite sports team. Lapel pins cost pennies to produce, but some are collector's items worth thousands of dollars. They may be tiny, but they're out there in huge numbers. This one company turns out about 5 million lapel pins a year. It all starts with a sketch of the pin design, and from that, the master, a negative made of magnesium, a type of metal. They'll make copies of this master to create a production mold. But first, using what's called a coping saw, they cut out the front and back pieces of the master. Using a dispenser about the size of a sewing needle, they glue the pieces together with epoxy. It takes 5 minutes to dry. Then they cast enough copies of the master to fill up a rubber disc. After tracing the outlines, a worker uses a surgical knife to meticulously carve out the cavities. He softens the rubber with paint thinner to enable precision cuts. Then he places a copy of the master in each cavity. Another disc goes on top. Then it's into a machine called a vulcanizer for 1 hour. This machine uses heat and pressure to cure the rubber, making it as hard as a car tire. It also melds the rubber around each master copy, embedding the detail. This will be the production mold for producing this pin design. Now, using a surgical knife again for precision, they carve out sprues, channels that during the casting process will direct the flow of molten metal to the cavities. They also make smaller, curved channels called runners to filter out any air or dirt particles. It's crucial to position the sprues and runners correctly because this mold produces an entire line of a particular pin. Mess up and they'd have to remake the mold from scratch. Next, they insert a centimeter-long brass tack called a post into each cavity. It'll later fasten to a clasp, attaching the pin to clothing. The post goes in now rather than later so that it will fuse to the back of the lapel pin during casting. Now to close the mold, they align the buttons on one half with the depressions in the other half. The mold then goes into what's called a spin casting machine. Using a cast iron ladle that can withstand the fiery temperature, they pour in molten metal, either pewter, zinc, or a tin alloy. As the machine spins, centrifugal force propels the metal into every nook and cranny of the cavities. After a minute of spinning, 400 rotations, the mold comes out. The metal takes about 5 minutes to cool and harden. The factory remelts the excess metal for the next batch. Next, a brass clasp called a clutch goes onto the post. Now the lapel pins go for an hour-long wash in soap and water and abrasive stones. The stones smooth out any rough edges. The pins go into the electroplating tank for a surface coating of metal. How many coats and the types of metal vary with the design. An electric current draws the metal particles onto the pins, plating them thoroughly. These pins first get copper plating, then nickel plating, then gold plating. Now it's time to paint the lapel pins. Workers follow a numerical guide like a paint-by-numbers kit. They paint each pin individually using minute quantities of epoxy paint. They control the paint syringe with a foot pedal. Once the paint dries, a machine called a pad printer gathers up ink and stamps on the tiny details, the ones too small to paint by hand. Pierce the post through the fabric, secure it with the clutch, and this lapel pin is now ready to wear.
If you think a baseball bat is a pretty simple thing, well, you're out in left field. Making a bat means balancing things like weight and thickness. The material it's made of can make a difference. Metal bats hit the ball faster. However, the pros use wood bats because of league regulations, and even the type of wood might impact the score. Barry Bonds cracked a home run record in 2001 with a wood bat like this, one made of maple, instead of the usual white ash. They can never tell just by looking at it that a chunk of maple has what it takes to make a good bat. So they weigh it to make sure the wood is really as thick and heavy as it appears. Next, pointed prongs grip the wood and spin it, while a carbide cutter rounds it. This is a very modern lathe called an XY machine. The rounded blank goes into a room called the library, joining others on the shelf that are waiting for their chance at the big leagues. A worker selects one of the blanks to fill an order that specifies a certain model and size. He weighs it again to make sure it measures up to what the player has ordered. The blank goes onto the XY machine and spins. A computer guides the cutter as it moves on rails and carves into the blank. It whittles 2.5 centimeters of wood from the blank in order to form a handle. It takes a total of 3 passes on this cutter to make the rough shape of a baseball bat, but it's quick work, completed in just 3 minutes. Now it's time for another weighing in. The bat is substantially lighter, which is what they want. Next, he measures the end of a completed bat with a caliper. Using a square-edged scraper, he rounds the knob as the bat spins on a more traditional lathe. He measures as he cuts. With another caliper, he checks the thickness of a completed bat and compares it to the one he's just carved. Now he takes a turning tool called a skew chisel. With its pointed tip, he cuts into the bat's handle just above the knob to narrow the shoulder. Again, he measures as he cuts to make sure the diameter is just right. Using the skew chisel, he shapes the slope of the bat, repeatedly checking with the caliper to make sure it meets specifications. He slims down the handle a little more. Then he angles the top of the knob with the chisel. He shapes the rest of it with a square-end chisel. Next, he curves the bat's barrel using the same tool. This gets rid of sharp edges that would cause a ball's impact to ripple down and jar the player. Then he goes back to the knob and completes the shaping with the skew-end chisel. Because the tool is extremely sharp, he can carve very precisely. The bat is now within 14 grams of its final weight. Using an electric sander, he smooths down some of the rough edges. He switches to a finer grit to finish off the job. As he sands, he measures, because this isn't just about getting the surface smooth. The bat has to be exactly the right size and weight for the player it's being made for. Now he places the bat's knob in an end mill. A spinning carbide disc cuts around the holes made by the pointed grippers on the lathes, producing a gentle scoop. Next, a bigger disc carves into the barrel, cupping it. Some players prefer a cupped bat because it balances differently. Now he places the bat on the scale for the final weighing, and it's exactly what the player ordered. He brushes paint onto the barrel and rubs stain into the lower half of the bat. He presses decals onto the bat so it sports both the brand name and distributor. Then he stamps the model number in gold ink and tops everything off with a light coat of varnish. Now this maple bat is ready for the big leagues and some heavy hitting.
The next time you bite into a marshmallow cookie, you can thank the ancient Egyptians. They invented marshmallow candy by thickening honey with sap from the root of the marshmallow plant, a herb that grows in salt marshes and along large bodies of water. Modern marshmallow contains gelatin instead of sap from the mallow root. The snap test, to make sure the coating is hard and thick enough. Then, the taste test. If you've got a sweet tooth, doing quality control in the marshmallow cookie factory is your dream job. To make a batch of dough for the cookie base, they mix wheat flour, salt, baking soda and powder, cornstarch, whey powder, and potassium sorbate. Then they add several liquid ingredients. This one causes a chemical reaction, making the biscuit lighter. This cream-colored liquid is vegetable oil shortening. This transparent liquid is glucose fructose, a sweetener. The ingredient proportions are also a company secret. From the mixer, the dough goes into a machine called the chipper. It shreds the big blob into pieces about the size of the cap on a highlighter pen. This makes the dough more manageable for the next machine, called a rotary mold. Inside that machine, a large roller flattens the dough pieces, forming them into a dense sheet about 1.5 centimeters thick. It then presses the sheet against another roller, whose surface is a cookie mold. The factory uses the rotary mold machine for many different types of cookies. It simply installs the appropriate roller for the cookie in production. For marshmallow cookie bases, the mold cavities are round. The bases exit the rotary mold and make their way onto a moving baking sheet that transports them to an oven. The baking time and temperature are, once again, top secret. The baked cookie bases exit the oven and move onto a conveyor belt that transports them to a cooling area. Once they cool to room temperature, the bases go into a machine called the base feeder. It lines them up like marching soldiers to receive their marshmallow filling and chocolate coating. The process does require military precision. Factory technicians have to adjust this machine daily to ensure to-the-millimeter accuracy. A portion of filling has to land perfectly centered on each base, finishing off in a curled peak, this brand's trademark. The company won't divulge how much marshmallow filling goes into each cookie, nor will it reveal its marshmallow recipe. But marshmallow is usually made from either corn syrup or sugar and gelatin. And now for the final layer, the chocolate coating. Not only are the marshmallow and base covered in hot melted chocolate, the base floats in it, which coats the underside as well. Built-in air jets blow off the excess. The chocolate hardens inside a cooling tunnel. How long that takes and the tunnel temperature are, you guessed it, classified information. As the cookies exit the cooling tunnel, a quality control worker does spot checks to ensure the coating is thorough, hard enough, and thick enough. On the packaging line, the cookies go into plastic trays. To keep up to speed, the workers have to grab 4 cookies in each hand without breaking the coating. The trays pass through a machine that wraps them in plastic film. This keeps the cookies fresh and also prevents them from falling out of the tray. Meanwhile, another machine assembles the boxes, first folding and gluing one end shut. Once workers load the trays, the machine glues the open end closed as well. Then, with the go-ahead from quality control, the box's next stop is the cookie aisle of your local supermarket.
Like all cheeses, mozzarella starts from milk. To assure good milk quality, the interior and exterior of tank trucks transporting milk must be washed after being emptied. A tank such as this one can carry an average of 30,000 liters of raw milk at a temperature of 3 or 4 degrees centigrade. Raw milk destined for cheese making contains 3.8% fats and 3.3% proteins. They store the milk and whey, a milk byproduct, in these immense silos, each with a capacity of 225,000 liters. This milk separator extracts surplus cream to adjust the percentage of fat according to the type of cheese to be made. Fabrication begins with this tank, which feeds the pasteurizer. Pasteurization sterilizes beverages which can easily ferment. Milk samples are drawn off to precisely determine their milk fat and protein content. Tests are carried out in this laboratory where they impose controls. These test tubes contain milk samples which will undergo microbiological analysis. Milk quality must be impeccable. This is a curdler with a 25,000 liter capacity into which milk and other essential ingredients for making mozzarella are introduced, such as the enzyme rennet that curdles the milk. This mix must be well stirred and cooked. The agitators are used to cut the whey into little lumps. This step takes about 30 minutes. The temperature of the tanks depends on the type of cheese they're making. Agitators continue stirring the milk. Once cooking is done, the whey is pumped onto tables to be drained. It stays there for about 25 minutes. The solid and the liquid are now well separated. The liquid we see draining is called lactose serum. The lactose serum will be concentrated and transformed into milk byproducts. The water has been almost entirely extracted and the cheese particles are now sufficiently dry. This large automated blade then moves cheese particles towards the next step. That is, toward the molder. In the molder, the cheese is cut up before being carried to the cooker, the final processing step. It appears that this mozzarella has just the right texture. The cheese finally arrives at the molder, which will give it the proper shape. Each mold has a 2.5 kilo capacity and is rectangular. Brine, a salt solution, serves to cool as well as to salt the cheese blocks. The blocks are unmolded and fall into a brine tank. Following on, the cheese blocks will remain in another brine solution for a while. They are then carried by a conveyor towards another tank, where they will be immersed for 4 to 10 hours at a temperature of 2 degrees centigrade. Sprays of brine remove the foam which forms at the surface of the tank. The 30,000 liters of milk that we saw coming in by truck at the beginning have enabled them to produce some 1,400 blocks of cheese in only 8 to 12 hours. The cheese blocks are finally vacuum packed, ready for shipment.